Dorian Wells was 41 years old, and until that Thursday evening, he believed his marriage, however quietly it had been struggling, was still his marriage. He was a structural engineer, steady, methodical, the kind of man who showed up for people without being asked and built things designed to last. That evening, he came home early to find his wife Camille in their living room with her two closest friends, 3 open wine bottles, and a conversation she never expected him to hear. He stood in the hallway, still in his jacket, and listened to the woman he'd spent 11 years with describe him as boring, predictable, and beneath her, while her friends laughed in the easy way people laugh at a joke they've heard before. Then Camille raised her glass. Her friends raised theirs, to finally getting rid of him. What Camille didn't know, what none of them knew, was that earlier that same day, Dorian had received a phone call that changed everything, and he hadn't told a single soul. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The garage light cast sharp shadows across Dorian's drafting table. Blueprint pages curled at the corners, weighted down by metal rulers and coffee-stained reference books. The radio hummed quietly, some old soul station playing Al Green. He'd always preferred working with music, just loud enough to fill the silence, but soft enough to let him think. His pencil moved steadily across the page, making precise adjustments to load-bearing calculations that should have been finished days ago. The client wanted revisions on short notice. Dorian didn't mind. The math was clean, logical, unlike so many other things. He glanced at his phone. 7:43 p.m. Camille had left 2 hours ago, designer handbag swinging from her shoulder, saying something about a hospital board function. Her perfume still lingered by the door. He hadn't asked for details. These days, their conversations stayed on the surface, like small talk between strangers who used to know each other well. The garage had become his sanctuary over the past year. Out here, surrounded by his tools and drawings, he could focus on problems that had clear solutions. Unlike the hollow space growing between him and his wife, these structural challenges could be solved with enough patience and precision. His workbench held the organized chaos of a methodical mind. Pencils arranged by hardness, reference materials stacked in order of use, calculator within easy reach. Everything had its place. Everything except his marriage, which seemed to slip further out of alignment with each passing month. The signs had been there, accumulating like hairline cracks in a foundation. Camille's phone always faced down now. She changed her password weekly. Her networking events ran later and later, and her explanations grew vaguer. She talked about her career trajectory, about her 5-year plan, about the life she was building. Always I, never we. Dorian adjusted his desk lamp, the metal arm creaking. He could have afforded a better one, but this one still worked. He believed in using things until they couldn't be fixed anymore. Maybe that's why he was still here, still trying to repair what felt increasingly broken. His phone lit up, buzzing against the metal table. An unfamiliar number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He had these calculations to finish. But something made him reach for it. Dorian Wells speaking. Mr. Wells, this is Reginald Ossie. I'm the estate attorney for your great-uncle, Clyde Wells. Dorian's pencil stilled on the page. He'd visited Uncle Clyde twice in the past year. Once alone, once with his father. The old man had been failing, but his mind stayed sharp. While other relatives sent impersonal fruit baskets and empty promises to visit, Dorian had sat with him, listening to stories about building a business from nothing, about patience and compound interest. I'm afraid I have news about your uncle, Reginald continued, his voice professionally gentle. He passed away yesterday evening. Dorian closed his eyes. I understand. There are some matters we need to discuss regarding his estate. A pause. Your great-uncle was quite specific in his will. The entire estate, which includes significant investment holdings and 2 commercial properties, has been left to you as sole beneficiary. The pencil rolled from Dorian's fingers, leaving a faint mark across his calculations. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? The total value of the estate is approximately $50.4 million. Mr. Wells was very clear. Everything goes to you. The garage seemed to tilt slightly. Dorian's free hand gripped the edge of his drafting table, steadying himself. The radio played on, Ray Charles now, oblivious to how the world had just shifted. When he could trust his voice, he thanked Reginald and ended the call. For several minutes, he sat perfectly still, listening to his own breathing mix with the quiet music. His first thought wasn't about the money. It was about Clyde, who had watched everything, understood everything, and made his choice accordingly. His second thought was about Camille. He picked up his phone again, scrolling past his wife's name to call his father. Harold Sr. answered on the second ring. Dad. Dorian's voice was steady. Uncle Clyde passed. A long silence. Then, You went to see him? More than once? Yes. Dorian swallowed. Dad, he left everything to me. All of it. Another silence, heavier this time. When Harold Sr. spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years of watching and knowing. Don't tell that woman a thing until you talk to a lawyer. Dorian started to object, but something in his father's tone made him stop. Made him think about Camille's password changes, her late nights, her separate plans. He called Reginald back, asked for a referral to a matrimonial attorney, received a name, Josephine Mack. The drawings still waited on his table, but when he looked at them now, the lines blurred together. The numbers refused to make sense. Tomorrow would be different. Everything would be different. The setting sun painted long shadows across the hospital construction site as Dorian wrapped up his final inspection. He'd pushed through the meeting efficiently, his mind elsewhere. The client noticed nothing unusual, just the same methodical engineer they'd come to rely on, marking his checklist with characteristic precision. He pulled into his driveway earlier than usual, the gravel crunching under his tires. 3 cars sat in front of the house. Camille's silver BMW, Dana's white Range Rover, and Priya's dark blue Tesla. The sight of them together wasn't unusual. Dana and Priya had been fixtures in their social circle for years, orbiting Camille like loyal satellites. The side door was his usual entrance when coming from work, closer to where he parked, and it led past the laundry room into the back hallway. He turned his key in the lock, the familiar mechanism clicking softly. The sound of women's laughter drifted from the living room, along with the clink of wine glasses. He was about to call out, to announce his presence the way he always did. But something in the tone of their laughter made him pause, his hand still on the doorknob. I swear, Camille's voice carried clearly, loosened by what must have been several glasses of wine. It's like living with a textbook. Everything has to be planned, calculated, measured twice. She affected a mocking tone. Let's review the budget again, honey. Did you remember to factor in the contingency percentage? Dana's laugh was immediate and knowing, the laugh of someone who had heard variations of this complaint before. God, how do you stand it? I don't anymore. Camille's voice took on a harder edge. That's the whole point. I've got everything lined up. Julie Marshall is handling the divorce. She's excellent, very discreet. The timeline's already in motion. Dorian stood absolutely still in the hallway, his work jacket still on, the strap of his laptop bag cutting into his shoulder. He didn't move to adjust it. It's about time, Priya chimed in, her voice carrying that particular tone of supportive righteousness. You've been planning this for what, a year? 14 months, Camille corrected, and Dorian could hear the smile in her voice, the satisfied sound of someone unveiling a well-executed plan. Had to get everything in order first. But now, she paused, and he heard the sound of a bottle being lifted, liquid pouring. Now it's just a matter of timing. He really has no idea? Dana asked, amusement threading through her words. Please. Camille's dismissal was casual, practiced. Dorian sees what he expects to see. That's his whole problem. No vision, no ambition. Just the same predictable patterns, day after day. While I've been building something real, he's been... She laughed. Well, he's probably in that garage right now, measuring something. The sound of glass, touching glass. Then Camille's voice again, raised slightly. To finally getting rid of him. To freedom, Dana echoed. To new beginnings, Priya added. The sound of 3 women drinking to the end of his marriage echoed in the quiet hallway. Dorian moved then, each step precisely placed, silently retracing his path to the side door. He closed it with the same care he'd used to open it, the latch catching with the faintest click. In his truck, he sat with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the warm yellow light spilling from his living room window. Music drifted faintly through the glass, something upbeat he couldn't quite identify. The inheritance paperwork sat in a folder on Reginald's desk, waiting for his signature. 14 months, she'd said. 14 months of planning while sleeping beside him. After 20 minutes, he started the engine. The drive to Walt's house was automatic. They'd been friends long enough that he could navigate it without conscious thought. Walt opened his door, took one look at Dorian's face, and stepped aside. They sat at Walt's kitchen table, the surface still showing water rings from countless beers shared over countless conversations. Dorian told him everything, the inheritance, the overheard conversation, the toast. With each detail, Walt's jaw tightened further, his fingers curling into fists on the tabletop. Before Walt could speak, Dorian raised his hand. I need you quiet and steady right now. Can you do that? Walt's knuckles were white, but he nodded, visibly restraining himself. 2 things stay secret, Dorian continued, his voice level. The money and the fact that I heard them tonight. Nobody knows either of those things. Not yet. Later, he drove home and walked past the now empty living room. 3 wine glasses sat in the sink, evidence of a celebration he wasn't meant to witness. He made his way to the guest room, not offering Camille an explanation she didn't ask for. Josephine Mack's downtown Charlotte office occupied a corner suite on the 12th floor, with views stretching toward the city's growing skyline. The space felt intentional, not flashy, but carefully arranged to convey competence and discretion. Like its occupant, Dorian thought, taking in the woman seated across the polished conference table. She was reviewing his initial paperwork, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her movements were unhurried, each document receiving its proper attention. The morning sun caught the silver threads in her dark hair, earned through what he imagined were countless cases like his. So, she said finally, looking up, you've inherited $50.4 million from your great-uncle, your wife has been planning her exit for 14 months, and you learned about her intentions through an overheard conversation yesterday evening. She removed her glasses. Did I miss anything material? No, Dorian replied. That covers the basics. Josephine nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. Let me explain your legal position, Mr. Wells. It's actually quite straightforward. She selected a legal pad, uncapped a pen. The inheritance, having been received before any divorce filing and coming through direct bequest with no marital connection, is entirely your separate property. There's no ambiguity there. She drew a clean line down the middle of the page. What your wife is entitled to is her equitable share of legitimate marital assets. That means the house equity you've built together, your joint savings accounts, and retirement contributions made during the marriage. She started noting figures. Based on the numbers you've provided, her pen moved efficiently across the paper, calculating rough divisions. Dorian watched her work, appreciating the precision of her method. After a moment, she turned the pad so he could see. This is an approximate figure, subject to final documentation. but it represents what Mrs. Wells would receive in an equitable division. She tapped the circled number at the bottom. It's enough to start over. Down payment on a modest home, perhaps, or a year's living expenses while establishing herself. But it's not. She chose her words carefully. It's not the sort of settlement that funds the life she appears to be anticipating. Dorian studied the number. It was clean, legitimate, and nowhere near what Camille had been positioning herself for. He nodded once. Now, Josephine continued, here's what you need to do, or rather, not do. Make no changes to your regular financial patterns. Don't move money, don't close accounts, don't make any unusual purchases or transfers. Behave in all observable ways, exactly as you have been. She held his gaze. The inheritance stays completely confidential. No one in your wife's social or professional circles can know about it. Not yet. Understood, Dorian said. I'll need comprehensive financial documentation, she continued. Bank statements, investment accounts, credit card histories, property records, everything from the marriage. How quickly can you gather those? I can have them to you within 3 days, Dorian replied. I keep detailed records. Something flickered across Josephine's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition of a client who wasn't going to create extra work through disorganization. She made another note. One last thing, Mr. Wells, she said, setting down her pen. The composure you're showing, maintain it. It's your strongest asset right now, beyond even the inheritance. Your wife has built certain expectations about how this will unfold. Let her keep those expectations a while longer. Dorian stood, gathering his briefcase. Thank you for your time, Ms. Mack. My office will be in touch about the documentation, she said, rising. And Mr. Wells, you're doing this correctly. Remember that. In the parking lot, Dorian sat in his truck and called his father. Harold Sr. answered on the second ring. Attorney laid it out, Dorian said simply. Inheritance is separate property. Everything's clear. She gets her share of marital assets, nothing more. There was a moment of silence on the line, then Harold Sr.'s voice, steady as bedrock. Good. Now hold. Yes, sir, Dorian replied. He ended the call, started his truck, and pointed it toward the office. There were structural calculations waiting on his desk, load-bearing equations that needed his attention. He would put his head down, do the work in front of him, and hold, just like his father said. The garage had always been Dorian's space for clarity. Tonight, its familiar order, pegboard of precisely arranged tools, shelves of labeled boxes, work tables scarred from years of careful measuring and cutting, felt like the only steady ground he had left. He spread the financial documents across the table in chronological order, the way he would arrange structural drawings before beginning an analysis. Bank statements, credit card bills, property records, 14 months of their shared financial life laid bare under the fluorescent shop lights. At first glance, everything looked normal. Their joint checking account showed the expected pattern. His direct deposits, her contributions, the regular outflow of mortgage payments and utilities. Their credit card statements reflected the routine of their marriage. Groceries, gas, home maintenance supplies. The surface appeared solid. But Dorian hadn't built his career by accepting surfaces at face value. He began cross-referencing Camille's deposits against her pay stubs, tracking the flow of money month by month. That's when he saw it, the careful extraction happening just beneath their daily financial life. Starting 14 months ago, Camille had opened a personal account at Second Regional Bank. The initial deposit was modest, $2,500, easily explained as a work bonus or reimbursement. Then came the transfers, $400 here, $750 there, each one sized to avoid drawing attention. Some months showed 3 smaller movements instead of 1 larger one. The pattern was deliberate, precise. Dorian created a spreadsheet, entering each transfer with the same attention he gave to load calculations. The numbers built steadily, one $150 in March, one $400 in April, one $200 in May. Month after month, while she sat across from him at dinner and discussed renovating the kitchen someday, she had been constructing her escape fund with architectural patience. He checked the account opening date against his mental timeline. 2 months after she started staying late at work more often. 3 months before the night she said she was too tired to visit his parents for Sunday dinner. The first of many such nights. The financial withdrawal had begun after the emotional one, but both were part of the same carefully mapped exit. The garage felt too quiet. Dorian switched on the radio, letting the low murmur of late-night jazz fill the space while he continued his analysis. Every document told part of the story. Credit card statements showing decreased joint purchases, property tax records confirming the equity they'd built in the house, equity she had let him continue paying into while knowing she planned to claim her share. He thought about the holidays they'd shared during these 14 months, Thanksgiving at his father's house, where she had smiled and helped clear dishes, Christmas morning, opening gifts she had chosen while already knowing she wouldn't be there next year, New Year's Eve, when she had kissed him at midnight with the practiced ease of someone who had stopped meaning it long ago. Working methodically, Dorian photographed each relevant document. He captured statement dates, account numbers, transfer amounts, building an irrefutable record of the parallel financial life she had constructed while maintaining the appearance of their marriage. The photos went into a dedicated folder on his phone, backed up immediately to secure cloud storage. He organized the physical documents chronologically, each page a marker of time in their unraveling. Bank statements showed the steady drip of her planning. Credit card bills tracked the gradual separation of their daily lives. Property records documented the home they had built together, or rather, the home he had largely built while she prepared to claim her portion and leave. The labeled folder sat on his work table until morning. He drove to Josephine's office before heading to work, the weight of 14 months of documented deception riding in his passenger seat. The morning sun caught the downtown buildings as he parked, turning the glass facades into mirrors. He thought about reflection, about surfaces that show you one thing while concealing another. Josephine's office was quiet when he arrived, the day's bustle not yet begun. She took the folder without comment, opened it at her desk, and began reviewing the contents. Dorian watched her expression shift subtly as she processed what the documents revealed. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition of something she had seen before and understood completely. She looked up after the first several pages, meeting his eyes directly. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "changes the shape of the case considerably. You did exactly the right thing bringing these to me." She paused, studying him. "And you documented everything properly. Well done." Walt's text came on a Tuesday morning. "Need to talk. Not urgent, but important." Dorian met him for lunch at their usual spot, a deli halfway between their job sites. Walt looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his sandwich wrapper before getting to the point. "I haven't asked around directly," Walt said, his voice low despite the lunch crowd noise. "But you hear things in the trades." Name kept coming up. Brent Okafor. He's an architect, does mostly mid-size commercial work. Been seeing someone matching Camille's description? About 8 months now. Dorian absorbed this without visible reaction. "How certain?" "Certain enough to tell you." Walt pushed his plate aside. "Look, I know you said to stay quiet. I haven't talked to anyone. Just kept my ears open at job sites, supplier meetings. People talk shop, names come up." Dorian nodded. Walt had done exactly what was needed. Gathered information without creating waves. "Thank you," he said simply. Back at his office, Dorian did some basic research. Brent Okafor's professional profile was easy to find. Mid-40s, well-regarded in the Charlotte architectural community, focused on sustainable commercial development. They had never crossed paths directly, but they shared enough professional connections to make an introduction natural. Through a mutual contact in structural engineering, Dorian arranged what appeared to be a routine project meeting. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground for a professional discussion. Dorian arrived early, chose a quiet corner table, and waited. When Brent walked in, Dorian studied him carefully before making eye contact. The architect's body language spoke volumes, shoulders slightly tensed, movements measured, the bearing of someone carrying an uncomfortable truth they hadn't yet decided how to address. Brent ordered coffee and approached the table. Before they could begin the pretense of project discussion, Dorian spoke quietly. "I'm Dorian Wells, Camille's husband." The change in Brent was immediate, but controlled. He went completely still, coffee cup halfway to the table. After a moment, he set it down carefully and met Dorian's eyes. "I think we should have an honest conversation," Brent said quietly. What followed was not what Dorian expected. There was no defensive posturing, no attempts to minimize or deflect. Brent spoke with the direct manner of someone who had already wrestled with their conscience and decided on truth as the only acceptable path. "I had no idea she was married," he began. "She told me she was separated, that the marriage was over except for finalizing paperwork. I had no reason to doubt her. We met through a development project. Everything seemed straightforward." Dorian listened, noting the past tense. Brent continued, 3 weeks ago, I was at a zoning board meeting. Someone mentioned seeing Camille with her husband at a community function. Recent function?" He shook his head slightly. "I asked some careful questions, found out the truth." "What did you do?" Dorian kept his voice neutral, ended it immediately. "Called her that night, told her I knew, told her not to contact me again." Brent's hands were steady around his coffee cup. "I don't do that. I don't get involved in deception. Not personally, not professionally." The sunlight through the coffee shop windows cast shifting patterns on their table. For a moment, neither man spoke. They were two professionals, connected by a woman who had deceived them both, finding no reason to be enemies. "I won't be drawn into whatever comes next," Brent said finally. "But I won't lie about what happened either. If you need a formal statement about the timeline, what I was told, when I learned the truth, I'll provide that through proper channels." Dorian nodded once. "That's fair." Brent stood, extended his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words carried the weight of genuine regret, not for Dorian's benefit, but as a simple truth between men who understood the value of integrity. "This isn't how I conduct my life." He left without further discussion. Dorian remained at the table, watching the movement of people through the coffee shop, all of them carrying their own stories, their own hidden weights. The following week, Josephine's office received a detailed statement from Brent's attorney. The document laid out the facts with professional clarity: the duration of the relationship, the circumstances of their meeting, Camille's representations about her marital status, and the immediate termination of contact upon learning the truth. Walt shifted in his chair at their usual deli spot, his sandwich untouched. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his voice carrying the weight of news he wished he didn't have to deliver. "Been hearing things. Not good things." Dorian set down his coffee, reading the discomfort in his friend's posture. "Tell me." "It's about what Camille's been saying, what she's been telling people about you." Walt's jaw tightened. "Not just lately. For months now." The lunch crowd bustled around them, but their corner table felt suddenly isolated, private. Walt continued, choosing his words carefully. "She's been painting a picture. About your marriage. About you. Nothing dramatic enough to raise flags, just consistent. Little comments here and there." "What kind of comments?" Dorian's voice remained steady. "That you're controlling with money. Emotionally checked out. That she's outgrown you." Walt's hands clenched around his water glass. "She's been dropping these things in conversations for months, setting up the story she wants people to believe when this all comes out." Dorian absorbed this, his expression unchanging. And Dana and Priya? They're carrying it forward, adding their own spin, confirming her version to anyone who asks. Walt leaned forward. People trust them, you know? If they say something's true. People believe it, Dorian finished quietly. The implications unfolded in his mind like blueprint layers. This wasn't just about money or infidelity. This was about identity. His character being carefully dismantled in the social world they shared, piece by piece, while he worked late hours and visited a dying uncle. The Hendersons stopped inviting me to their weekly games, Dorian said, a small detail suddenly making sense. Mark Henderson used to call me brother. Walt nodded grimly. They've heard the version where you're the reason Camille's unhappy. The version where she's trying to break free from something suffocating. Dorian thought about all the subtle shifts in his social circles over the past months, the slightly cooler greetings, the conversations that stopped when he approached, the gradual distance from people he'd considered friends. How many? He asked. Enough, Walt replied. She's been careful about it. Strategic. Telling the right people. Letting it spread naturally. Dana and Priya vouching for her version makes it seem legitimate. That evening, Dorian sat alone in his garage. No radio, no drawings. Just the weight of understanding that while he'd been focusing on financial documents and legal strategies, something else had been happening. Something that couldn't be fixed with settlement agreements or court orders. His name, his character, the truth of who he was, carefully unraveled by three women who had raised their glasses and then carried their story into every corner of the world that knew him. The concrete floor was cool and solid beneath his chair. Tools hung in their precise places on the wall. Everything ordered, everything in its place. But the space felt different now, knowing that outside these walls, in living rooms and coffee shops and casual conversations, he had already been cast as someone else entirely. The side door creaked open. Harold Sr. stepped in without announcement, the way he always appeared when something was wrong. He pulled up another chair, sat beside his son in the gathering darkness. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Harold Sr. had raised him alone, had taught him that a man's name was something you built slowly and protected fiercely. Now they sat together while Dorian processed the full scope of what Camille and her friends had done, not just to his finances or his marriage, but to the careful architecture of his reputation. After a long while, Dorian stood. He walked to his work table, rolled out the drawings he'd left unfinished. His father watched as he picked up his pencil and returned to the precise lines and measured angles of his work. He was not the story they told. Everyone who mattered would know that before this was over. And Dana and Priya would learn that the social capital they had spent so freely on Camille's behalf was gone for good. Harold Sr. stayed a while longer, his presence solid and unchanged in the quiet garage. No advice was offered. None was needed. They both understood that some things couldn't be fixed with settlements or lawyers. Some things required time, truth, and the patient strength of a man who knew exactly who he was. Josephine's office was cool and quiet when Dorian arrived for their morning meeting. She had arranged the documentation in precise stacks on her desk. Financial records, Brent's statement, evidence of the hidden account, everything organized with characteristic thoroughness. "We're ready," she said, her tone carrying the professional certainty he had come to trust. "All documentation is complete and properly filed. We can initiate formal separation proceedings as soon as you give the word." Dorian looked at the carefully assembled evidence of his marriage's dissolution. Every paper represented a choice Camille had made. The account she'd hidden, the story she'd crafted, the life she'd planned without him. He nodded once. "Do it." "You're sure about service at her workplace?" Josephine asked, not questioning his decision but confirming his intent. "Yes," Dorian said. "No ambiguity about receipt. No private moment for her to reframe it. Clean and clear, in front of witnesses." Josephine made a note. It will likely be tomorrow, mid-morning. I'll have confirmation when it's done. The next day, Dorian was reviewing site plans when his phone buzzed with a text from Walt. It's done. Process server caught her coming back from her morning meeting. Dorian set his phone down and returned to his drawings. Within hours, Camille had retained Patricia Chen, a divorce attorney known for aggressive representation. Her initial filing arrived at Josephine's office with a list of demands that reflected months of careful calculation, division of property, financial support, everything precisely outlined by someone who believed she knew exactly what cards everyone was holding. Walt came by that evening with takeout. They sat in Dorian's garage, the radio playing softly in the background. "When are you going to tell her about the money?" Walt asked, watching his friend carefully. "I'm not," Dorian replied. "Josephine will disclose it through discovery. It's the legal requirement. All assets have to be declared." "So she finds out from a document?" "She finds out in a conference room surrounded by lawyers when everything's already in motion." Dorian took a bite of his food. No private conversation where she can negotiate. No chance to adjust her strategy from the beginning. Just facts on paper, delivered through proper channels. Walt considered this. That's going to hit hard. "It's going to hit exactly as hard as it needs to," Dorian said quietly, "with exactly the witnesses it needs to have." They ate in companionable silence for a while. The radio played old soul music, the kind Dorian's father always had on in the garage when he was teaching his son how to build things properly. "Chen's going to push for full financial disclosure fast," Walt said finally. "That's her standard play." "Let her push," Dorian replied. "Everything's ready. Everything's documented. Everything's exactly where it needs to be." The evening settled around them, cool and quiet. Walt gathered the takeout containers, hesitated like he wanted to say more, then simply clasped Dorian's shoulder before leaving. Alone in the garage, Dorian rolled out a set of drawings for tomorrow's site meeting. The lines were precise, the measurements exact, every element carefully placed to carry its proper weight. He had always understood structures this way. Not just the visible parts, but the hidden supports that made everything hold together. Later that night, lying in the guest room that had become his space, Dorian felt a particular kind of stillness settle over him. It wasn't peace exactly. Too much had been broken for peace. It wasn't anticipation. He was too methodical for that kind of emotion. It was the quiet certainty of a man who had checked every calculation, verified every measurement, and knew that the structure he had built would hold exactly as designed. Every beam was in place. Every support was properly anchored. Every element had been chosen and positioned with careful purpose. Now, it was simply a matter of waiting for the whole thing to reveal itself, one precise piece at a time. The morning sunlight filtered through the Venetian blinds in Kenneth Chen's office as he opened the financial disclosure documents from Dorian's legal team. His secretary had just delivered them, still warm from the courier's envelope. He settled back in his leather chair, coffee cooling on his desk, and began his initial review. The first few pages were standard: joint accounts, retirement funds, property records. Then he turned to page 7. His hand stilled. He read it again. He set his coffee down carefully and reached for his phone. The call to Josephine Mack's office lasted less than 5 minutes. Her response was measured, precise, and entirely without room for negotiation. When he hung up, he sat for a long moment looking at the documentation spread across his desk. Then he buzzed his secretary. "Get me a conference room for tomorrow morning." Priority client. Across town, Josephine's phone lit up with Dorian's number. "It's done," she said when she answered, her tone carrying the particular understatement of someone who had made calls like this before. "They've reviewed the disclosures. They're requesting a settlement conference as soon as possible." Dorian stood at his desk, looking out over the Charlotte skyline. "How soon?" "Tomorrow morning." "They're motivated to discuss terms." The pause carried volumes of professional satisfaction. The inheritance documentation was very clear. The timing, the direct bequest, the complete absence of marital connection. Everything is properly structured. There's no room for challenge. Within hours, Camille's legal team began quietly restructuring their approach. The confident list of demands that had arrived with their initial filing underwent rapid revision. The timeline Camille had operated on, the one that assumed a certain financial outcome, collapsed under the weight of reality. Kenneth Chen found himself managing a client who had walked into his office with one set of expectations and now faced something entirely different. The $50.4 million inheritance was untouchable. The documentation Josephine had assembled made that legally unambiguous. His client would receive her equitable share of legitimate marital assets only: the house equity, joint savings, retirement accounts accumulated during the marriage. That number was real, but it wasn't transformative. It wasn't the foundation for the future Camille had been planning. It was a start-over number, barely enough to begin again at a much more modest level than she had anticipated. And there was the matter of the hidden account. The departure fund Camille had built over 14 months, carefully accumulated through small transfers designed to stay beneath notice, was identified in discovery as a marital asset. Josephine's documentation laid out every transfer, every date, every deliberate step of its construction. The total would be folded into the calculation against Camille's share of the marital estate, reducing her final settlement further. The next morning, Josephine sat in the conference room reviewing the final numbers before Chen arrived with his client. The math was clean, the documentation precise, the outcome essentially locked. Camille would leave with less than she planned for and no remaining leverage to improve her position. Dorian did not attend. He had made it clear from the beginning. He would review everything, sign what needed signing, but he would not sit across a table and watch this part unfold. He spent that morning at a job site in uptown Charlotte, reading load calculations for a new commercial development. The settlement conference proceeded exactly as Josephine had structured it. The numbers were presented. The documentation was reviewed. The legal framework she had built held perfectly under examination. There was surprisingly little discussion, the kind of quiet that descends when all parties understand that the available moves have already been made. That evening, Dorian's phone rang as he was packing up his site document. "It's done," Josephine said. "Exactly as we outlined. They've accepted the terms." Dorian nodded once, though she couldn't see it. "Thank you. The papers will be ready for your signature tomorrow morning." He ended the call and looked out over Charlotte as the sun set behind the buildings. Somewhere in this city, Camille was having a very different conversation with her attorney. But that wasn't his concern anymore. His focus was on the load calculations spread across his temporary desk, the weight distribution that would make this new structure stand. The for sale sign hadn't gone up yet, but it would by morning. Dorian pulled into the driveway of the house he'd helped choose 11 years ago. The lawn needed cutting. He'd always handled that on Saturdays. He sat in his truck for a moment, looking at the garage where he'd first heard about the inheritance, where he'd discovered the hidden transfers, where his father had sat with him in silence when the weight felt heaviest. Camille's car wasn't there yet. He used his key, still on his ring for a few more days, and walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly as it had been, but it all felt smaller somehow, less significant. He pulled out a chair at the table where they'd had 1,000 ordinary mornings and waited. 10 minutes later, he heard her car. The front door opened and closed. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, a sound he used to listen for at the end of long days. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, perfectly put together as always, carrying herself with the practiced composure of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, taking the chair across from him. Professional, controlled, the voice she used in board meetings. Dorian said nothing. He simply waited. Camille began with what was clearly a prepared statement. She talked about feeling stifled, about outgrowing what they had, about needing more than the life he seemed content with. She described his steadiness as limitation, his quiet competence as lack of ambition. She framed everything, the account, the timeline, the exit strategy, as reasonable responses to a marriage that had become too small for her. Her voice never wavered. Her hands stayed still on the table. She had practiced this. When she finished, Dorian let the silence hold for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice as level as when he presented structural findings to clients. It was a Thursday evening, 7 weeks ago. You were in the living room with Dana and Priya. 3 wine glasses. You said I was boring, predictable, beneath your social ambitions. Then you raised your glass and toasted to finally getting rid of him. They raised theirs, too. All 3 of you drank to that. He watched the slight shift in her expression, the first crack in the composure. 14 months ago, you opened an account at First Carolina Bank. Starting balance, $2,500. Then the transfers began. $750 on March 3rd, $900 on March 17th, $800 on April 1st. Would you like me to continue with the dates? She didn't answer. Brent Okafor told me everything. He was direct, professional, handled himself with more dignity than you showed either of us. He had no idea you were married. You told him we were separated, just waiting on paperwork. He ended it immediately when he learned the truth. Dorian leaned forward slightly. But that's not even the most interesting part. Dana and Priya. They took the story you gave them and carried it everywhere. To the Hendersons, to the Martins, to people at your hospital, to people at my firm. They painted a very specific picture of who I am. Would you like to know who repeated it back to me? Something flickered across Camille's face, the first hint of genuine discomfort. But here's what matters most. You want to know about the money? About Clyde? I drove down to see him 8 times in the last year. Alone. Called him every holiday while you were at work function. The uncle who expected that inheritance? He sent fruit basket. Never visited once. Never called. Clyde noticed everything. He always noticed everything. Dorian's voice remained steady, almost gentle. The money exists because I was the kind of man who showed up for people when showing up cost him something. You lived with that man for 11 years. You never once looked at what was actually in front of you. He stood up, keys already in hand. He didn't wish her well. He didn't wish her poorly. He simply walked out of that house for the last time, leaving her at the kitchen table where 1,000 ordinary mornings had passed between them. Through the window, he heard no movement from inside. No words followed him. She had no prepared remarks left for this moment. The settlement agreement landed on Josephine's desk with both signatures, notarized and filed. Clean. Final. Dorian reviewed the numbers one last time. The house sale proceeds split equitably. Retirement accounts divided. Joint savings distributed. Camille's hidden departure fund had been reallocated against her share in Discovery, reducing her total settlement further. The final figure was enough to start over, but nowhere near the transformation she'd planned. Reginald Osei's office felt different this time. No shock, no weight of revelation. Just the quiet satisfaction of paperwork being completed correctly. The estate transfer documents lay before him. $50 million passing from Great-Uncle Clyde's disciplined lifetime into Dorian's steady hands. Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Wells, Reginald said, his formal tone carrying genuine respect. Once you sign here and here, the transfer will be complete. Dorian signed. The pen felt significant in his hand. In the professional circles Camille had carefully cultivated, a different kind of transfer was taking place. The truth about her 14 months of hidden financial movements spread through the same channels where she'd built her previous narrative. People who'd heard Dana and Priya's carefully crafted version now learned about the documented transfers, the dates, the calculated deception while she shared a home and bills with her husband. Brent Okafor's written statement circulated quietly but persistently. His account, factual, dignified, and completely incompatible with how Camille had presented herself, reached corners of their shared professional world that Dana and Priya hadn't considered. His integrity cast an uncomfortable light on everyone else's choices. Dana noticed it first, at a hospital fundraiser. Subtle shifts in how people received her. Conversations that cooled slightly when she approached. She'd been a primary carrier of Camille's story, adding her own editorial weight to shape perceptions. Now she found herself holding a collapsed narrative, her own credibility damaged by association. Priya experienced it in client meetings, small hesitations, careful distances. She had been part of toasting a clean getaway. Instead, she was now linked to a documented pattern of deception that had been handled with more grace by its target than its architects. Neither woman was ruined. Their professional lives continued. Their social circles remained intact, but something had shifted permanently. Their judgment was quietly questioned. Their versions of events were no longer automatically trusted. The friendship with Camille, once a source of social capital, became a liability they began managing through careful distance. Camille found herself rebuilding from an unexpected position. The settlement provided a foundation, but not the freedom she'd designed. The loyal circle she'd counted on began to thin exactly when she needed it most. Phones rang fewer times. Invitations arrived less frequently. The narrative she'd built so carefully had crumbled, leaving her to face the consequences without the buffer of sympathetic friends. In his new office, Dorian met with the wealth management team he'd selected. They discussed investment strategies, philanthropic planning, and the structural engineering consultancy he was developing. The focus would be commercial development in underserved urban corridors around Raleigh, bringing his expertise to projects that needed it most. Harold Sr. sat with him through several of these meetings, offering the occasional gruff observation that cut straight to the heart of things. They were building something that would outlast both of them. It felt right. When Dorian walked out of Reginald's office that final time, Walt was waiting in the parking lot with 2 coffees. He handed one over without ceremony. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching traffic pass on the street below. "So, what now?" Walt asked finally. Dorian took a careful sip. The coffee was exactly how he liked it. Walt had been paying attention all these years. "Build something," he said. Walt nodded, understanding completely. They didn't need more words than that. 18 months later, Dorian stood on his balcony in Raleigh as dusk settled over the city. The consultancy was operating successfully. Harold Sr. visited regularly, watching football and offering quiet approval of his son's choices. Walt's contracting business had landed its largest contract to date, through a connection Dorian had made without being asked, which neither of them ever discussed directly. In quiet moments like this, Dorian sometimes thought of Brent Okafor. He'd heard the architect had relocated, rebuilt his practice, kept his integrity intact through the whole mess. Dorian felt something close to respect for how the man had handled an impossible situation. He did not think of Camille. The city spread out below him, lights beginning to flicker on in office buildings and apartments. The quiet around him was full rather than empty, the kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly what you're building and why. He had always constructed things that held weight. It was who he was. Now he was building for himself. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.